Once, many years ago, there dwelt a village nestled between two hillsides, isolated from the rest of the world. And one day, within this village, a baby girl appeared. She was pale, so pale that you could see the blue blood pumping furiously beneath her skin, with dark hair and a cry that, even as a child, was like the wind's song. And so that is what they named her, Song. Some said that she was the daughter of night and wind, a demigoddess in her own right. Others insisted that she was abandoned by wandering travelers, unwanted even by her own parents. But everyone agreed that she could not belong to anyone in the village, for they had never seen coloring quite like hers before. And so Song grew up, passed from house to house, never having a home. She grew up to stand a full head taller than the other girls. Where they were light and bright, she was dark and deep. Where they flirted and laughed, she watched in silence from the shadows. She was awkward around others, awkward around herself, and eventually the villagers began to feel uncomfortable around her. It was something like Providence, then, that led to one of the village elders passing on into the next world. He left behind no family, just a small cluttered cottage set at the edge of town. The villagers offered this cottage to Song, and eagerly she accepted. From then on, she no longer watched from the shadows. She watched from the windows. After moving into the cottage, Song immediately set to work clearing it out, and in doing so found the paints and canvases that the old man had purchased and subsequently abandoned. Song did not stop to think. She did not hesitate at all. She simply began. She painted small, beautiful girls smiling up at tall, handsome men. She painted weddings and families and lightness and laughter and joy, and the more that she painted, the more word of her incredible talent began to spread, both within the village and in the surrounding countryside, and more people came from all over the world to admire and purchase her artwork. At first, she hoped that this newfound talent would reunite her with the villages that she felt so alienated from, but now more than ever, it was clear that she was not one of them. Now, more than ever, she was alone. And then one day, a woman walked into the shop. She was small and delicate, with hair like the sun, skin that had been kissed by it, and eyes the color of the moon hung heavy with clouds. She moved with a lightness and a grace that Song had never once possessed, and as she walked around the shop admiring the artwork, unconsciously Song's paint-splattered hands twisted together in envy. Finally, the woman turned to Song. "These are beautiful," she said, "but they are not what I am looking for." "What are you looking for?" Song answered. "Maybe I can help." The woman smiled a smile so bright that Song was momentarily blinded. "I want truth," she said. "Truth and possibilities. Can you do that for me?" Song thought for a moment, and then she pulled a piece of paper from the pile behind her at the table, picked up her charcoals, and began to draw. She drew herself seated between two mirrors. In one of these mirrors' reflections, she drew herself as she saw herself, too tall, too pale, with eyes just a hair too widely set, and in the other she drew herself how she wished to be, smaller, more delicate, more beautiful. Pleased, she set down her charcoals and turned this page to the woman, but the woman looked at it and frowned. "This is not truth or possibilities. This is just perspective. Try again." Frustrated, Song did. This time she drew herself standing in the middle of the village, still too tall, still too pale, eyes still just a hair too widely set, crying as two people walked away with coloring similar to her own, abandoning their daughter. But on the other side of the drawing, the god of wind and the goddess of night reached out loving hands to her, acknowledging her as their own. Once more, Song set down her charcoals and turned the page to the woman, and once more the woman frowned. This is not truth or possibilities. This is just perspective. Try again. And Song did. Over and over she drew. She drew herself as accepted and rejected, successful and destitute, always too tall, too pale, and eyes just a hair too widely set. But every single time she set her charcoals down and turned the page to the woman would frown and say, "This is not truth or possibilities. This is just perspective. Try again." It was dawn when the woman had walked into the shop, and the sun was just beginning to set low over the hills when Song finally reached the final piece of paper in her stack. She was drained of her emotions, drained of her perspectives, and determined. One last time, she picked up her charcoals and began to draw. This time, she drew herself, still too tall, still too pale, still with eyes just a hair too widely set, being dragged downward into a pit of grasping, greedy hands, and closer inspection of those hands would reveal them to be Song's own hands, paint-splattered and calloused as they were, dragging her downwards into despair. The Song in the picture reached desperate hands to a staircase that spiraled up to the heavens, a staircase made of mirrors. And in the reflection of those mirrors, Song drew herself. At first, the reflection looked back afraid at what she had dragged herself from, but as the staircase spiraled up toward the sky, so did the Song in the reflections begin to rise. The curled, bowed shoulders became straight, the chin developed a determined lift, and a small but confident smile appeared on the lips of the woman who strove ever upward. And as she reached the final reflection, Song finally drew herself as she was. Tall, but with nobility and grace, pale, but with mysticism, not sickliness, and yes, perhaps her eyes were a bit widely set, but they added an unusual, memorable flair to the woman who strode ever upward, unafraid of what lay before her, and unafraid of what lay behind. And Song wondered if she was not something like beautiful after all, as she set her charcoals down one last time and turned the final piece of paper to the woman. And the woman looked at it and smiled. "This is truth," she said, resting one fingertip lightly on the Song being dragged down by her own hands. "And this is possibilities." And she traced that finger up the staircase, leaving it to rest for just a moment at the reflection at the very top. And then she looked into Song's eyes, and there was such wisdom, such patience, such love there, that Song wondered how she could have ever mistaken the woman for a mere mortal. And the woman's lips parted, and she spoke but 3 words more. "Make it so." And Song blinked, and the woman was gone, and Song never saw her again.